I didn't sign up for this. That's all the text said. Just 5 words that shattered a life. No explanation, no apology. Just a simple cold message sent minutes after she drained our joint savings account. $38,000 gone. I was still in shock from my cancer diagnosis, sitting in my truck outside the clinic, when I called my wife, Vanessa. I asked her to meet me at home. She said she had errands. What I came home to wasn't just an empty house, it was the end of the life I thought we were building together. Half the closet was cleared out, her suitcase was gone, and even our wedding photo had vanished from the nightstand. That was when the text came in. The money was already moved. She didn't even wait to hear how bad it was. She just left. My name is Logan. I'm 32 years old, a head mechanic at a small garage in Spokane, Washington. 4 hours earlier, a doctor told me I had stage 2 lymphoma. Treatable, but a long road ahead. I wasn't scared of the cancer. I was scared of facing it alone. But now, I didn't have a choice. I sat on the back deck, beer in hand, watching the sun drop behind the trees, feeling the weight of everything shift. The cancer, I could fight that. But her betrayal, that hit harder than any diagnosis. And what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she'd just started a fight she couldn't win. Because while she ran, I started planning. Stick around until the end, because what happens next will flip this entire story on its head. And believe me, by the time we're done, you'll be glad you saw how it all unfolds. Next chapter. A casserole, a neighbor, and a decision that changed everything. The sun was setting low behind the pine trees as I sat on the back deck, still clutching the bottle of beer I'd opened an hour ago. I hadn't taken more than 2 sips. I wasn't numb, far from it. I felt everything. The burn in my throat from trying to hold back emotions, the hollow echo in my chest, where trust used to live, the chill, creeping into the air and settling into my bones, like the cancer had already spread, further than the doctor had said. I hadn't cried. I hadn't yelled. There was a strange stillness in me, like my body knew it didn't have the luxury of falling apart just yet. Tim, my neighbor from next door, must have noticed something was off. He came over to the fence, his hands tucked into the pockets of his old flannel. "Everything all right?" he asked. Not nosy, just neighborly. Saw Vanessa peel out of here earlier. Car was packed. I glanced over at him. "Got some health news," I said, forcing a tight smile. She didn't take it well. He nodded slowly, not pressing. "Well, you let me know if you need anything. Lisa makes a mean casserole. Appreciate it," I said, meaning it more than he probably realized. After he walked off, I finally stood up, went inside, and pulled out the black folder my Uncle Brian had handed me the month before. He used to be an estate planner, retired now, but still sharp as ever. When my grandfather passed away earlier that year and left me a small parcel of land up north, Brian had helped me sort through the transfer. "Everyone needs their affairs in order," he'd said. "Especially when you're married. Protect each other." At the time it made sense. Vanessa and I were building something. Or at least I thought we were. I'd already started the paperwork to list her as co-owner of the '69 Mustang I'd spent 4 years restoring. I hadn't filed the DMV paperwork yet, thank God for that. I'd also opened a separate bank account for the upcoming land sale just to keep the transaction clean. Funny how you're prepared for the wrong kind of disaster. I stared at the documents in the folder, deeds forms, old tax paperwork, realizing just how close I'd come to handing everything over to someone who had already decided I was disposable. The truth settled hard and fast. Vanessa didn't leave because she couldn't handle the illness. She left because the illusion had cracked. I wasn't her version of success anymore. Her version was shiny, well-dressed, high-rise condo networking brunches. I was grease-stained jeans mortgage, almost paid off, and a garage full of tools and grit. The quiet in the house was different now. Not peaceful, empty. No scent of her shampoo, no sound of heels across the hardwood, no soft clink of wine glasses from the dishwasher. Just my own breath. I tried calling Ellie, my sister, in Portland, but it went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. Not yet. That night I slept maybe 2 hours. Woke up drenched in sweat, unsure if it was anxiety, the early symptoms of chemo, or just heartbreak. My mind kept replaying it all, the look on her face during that dinner a few nights ago, how she didn't ask twice if I was okay, how her phone was always face down, the apartment brochure in her purse, the way she stopped saying we and started saying I. The next morning, I found a foil-covered dish on my porch. It was still warm. No note, but I didn't need one. Lisa had dropped off the promised casserole. I took it inside and placed it in the fridge. The gesture, as small as it was, hit me harder than I expected. Maybe it was because it came without expectation. Or maybe because it reminded me that some people still cared, even if they didn't say much. I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and started listing out everything: joint accounts, the house, my car, the Mustang, the land up north, the 401k from my last job, the health insurance plan through the garage. I needed clarity. If Vanessa was willing to disappear with the money the moment I got bad news, I couldn't afford to let emotion cloud what came next. I had to get ahead of this. I called Brian. When he picked up, I didn't bother with small talk. Remember when we talked about updating my estate stuff? Yeah, he said, voice alert. Why? Because everything just changed. He was quiet for a beat. Is this about the diagnosis? That's part of it, I said. But it's mostly about what happened after. He didn't need details to understand the urgency. Come by this afternoon, he said. Bring everything. I spent the next hour gathering documents and packing them into a satchel. As I zipped it shut, I glanced at the Mustang parked out front, sunlight catching its freshly polished hood. I'd poured sweat and patience into that machine. For a moment I thought about selling it, but not yet. That car was part of my identity, something I'd built with my own hands. Not everything in my life had to be dismantled. That afternoon I sat across from Brian at his kitchen table, the folder spread between us. His glasses perched low on his nose as he flipped through page after page. He didn't say much, just made small grunts and scribbled notes in the margins. Finally he looked up. You did good prepping for this, even if you didn't know it. So what now? I asked. Now he leaned back in his chair. Now we protect what's yours. For the first time in days, I felt like I had some kind of grip. I wasn't just reacting, I was taking control. Vanessa thought she left a man too weak to fight. What she didn't know was that pain has a way of waking something inside you, something focused, relentless. And just like that, I knew exactly who I had to become. Because while she took the money and ran, I was about to learn that what she left behind was worth far more than what she stole, and someone was about to find out just how much damage a quiet man can do when he's been pushed too far. Brian and I spent hours that day piecing everything together. He moved with quiet precision, scanning account statements, mortgage records, the land deed, and the car title paperwork I'd almost filed with Vanessa's name on it. He had a calm that steadied me like he'd seen worse and walked people through it. But even he had to pause when I showed him the text Vanessa had sent. I didn't sign up for this. His eyes narrowed. She took the entire account before she even knew the details. I nodded, 40 minutes after I called her from the clinic. He set the paper down slowly. Then she didn't walk away out of fear. She planned it. That's when something inside me clicked. This wasn't just abandonment. This was a coordinated exit. Vanessa didn't panic, she calculated. And that somehow was worse than if she'd just run in fear. It meant she had time to think it through and still chose to leave. Brian leaned forward. We're going to document everything. The date of the diagnosis, the call logs, the withdrawal timestamps, her message, the land paperwork, everything. Over the next few days, I moved on pure instinct. Chemo hadn't started yet, but the fatigue had. It was a strange tiredness, not just physical, but emotional. I'd wake up at 2 a.m., drenched in sweat anxiety sitting heavy in my chest. But each morning, I pushed through. I drove to the DMV to remove Vanessa's name from the Mustang title. It hadn't been finalized, which worked in my favor. Then I met with my bank to place security holds on all joint access. When I mentioned I'd just been diagnosed with cancer and that my wife had cleared our account the same day, the bank manager raised an eyebrow and flagged the transaction for review. The highlight of that week came from an unexpected source, Megan, Vanessa's cousin. She'd always been kind to me during family gatherings. Nothing more than small talk, really, but she never treated me like just the mechanic the way Vanessa's parents did. That afternoon she emailed me, "Logan, I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. I don't know what Vanessa is thinking. Just know I'm here if you need anything." I stared at the message for a while before replying. Does she know about the diagnosis? Megan's response came fast. Yes. She told everyone, said she couldn't handle it and needed a fresh start. My family is shocked. This isn't right. There it was. Confirmation. She hadn't left because she didn't know. She left because she did. If that moment hits you like it hit me, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. This story's just getting started, and trust me, it only gets more twisted from here. Megan's honesty grounded me. I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't just imagining things. I took screenshots of our emails, added them to the folder. Every piece of evidence mattered now. I wasn't building a case out of revenge. I was building it out of necessity. Medical bills were coming, and I needed to make sure Vanessa didn't try to come back for more. The next morning, I started chemotherapy. The nurse was kind, but there was something in her voice, a softness I didn't know I needed. "First one's the hardest," she said, as she connected the IV. "You'll get through this." Took an Uber, I told her when she asked if my wife was in the waiting room. She's out of town. I couldn't bring myself to say the truth that she was gone for good, that she'd packed her life up and walked away like I was a burned-out appliance she didn't want to fix. The chemo hit hard, harder than I expected. My stomach turned inside out. I was sweating by the time I got home, and I barely made it to the bathroom before I collapsed onto the floor, shaking. That's where I spent the night. The casserole Lisa made was still untouched in the fridge. I couldn't keep water down, let alone a meal, and I'd never felt more alone. The next morning I called Ellie, told her everything, the cancer, the money, Vanessa. There was a long silence on the other end. Then her voice cracked. "I'm coming up." "Not yet," I said. "I need to get my head straight first." She didn't argue, but I could feel her wanting to get in the car that second. Sometimes just knowing someone's ready to show up is enough. And yet somehow, despite the sickness, the betrayal, the weight of it all, I wasn't broken. I was hurting, yes, but broken. Vanessa may have taken the money, but she hadn't taken everything. She couldn't take who I was. She couldn't take what I still had the power to protect. That weekend, I drove back to Brian's house with the growing stack of paperwork. We mapped out every angle, property rights, divorce proceedings, legal options. He looked over one of the bank statements and shook his head. She might have made this easier for us than she realizes. This isn't just cold. It might be illegal. That made me pause. "You think I could win?" I asked. Brian didn't hesitate. "If we build this right, I don't think she has a chance." That was the moment something inside me solidified. I wasn't going to just survive this. I was going to come out smarter, stronger, and unshakable. If you've ever been in a place where life kicked you while you were down, but you found the strength to stand back up, drop a comment below. Your story matters too, and this fight, it's far from over. Back at home, I stood in the garage looking at the Mustang. For the first time since the diagnosis, I saw not just a car, but a reminder, a symbol, that something broken can be restored, that something worth holding on to is still mine, and that not everything needs to be shared with someone who never planned to stay. I didn't know it yet, but the storm that was coming next would test everything we had built and reveal just how far some people are willing to go when they think you've got nothing left to fight with. The Monday after my first chemo session, I woke up, weak aching and unable to keep anything down. I spent most of the day on the couch with a bucket beside me and my phone within reach. Not because I expected anyone to call, but because part of me still couldn't believe how quickly everything had collapsed. I kept replaying that last dinner with Vanessa before the diagnosis. She sat across from me talking about some co-worker's promotion. I remember watching her face, wondering if she'd notice I hadn't touched my food, wondering if she'd ask again if I was okay. She didn't. She just kept eating, and that was the moment I knew she was already gone. Her body was there, but her heart had left weeks earlier. 3 days after that first chemo, I got a letter in the mail. Certified, thick envelope. Inside was a formal notice from Vanessa's lawyer. She was filing for divorce. Grounds irreconcilable differences. No mention of my illness. No explanation. Just a list of demands, half the equity in the house removal from the mortgage, and a curious silence about the $38,000 she'd already taken. I stared at the pages, my hands shaking, not from chemo, but from disbelief. She walked out, drained our savings, left me in the middle of a medical crisis, and now wanted more. That night I brought the letter to Brian. He read it slowly, line by line, then set it down and looked at me. Pretty bold, he said. She thinks you're too sick to fight back. What should I do? I asked. He didn't hesitate. Don't respond yet. Let's see how far she wants to push this. The very next day, my phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. Logan, it's Vanessa. This is my new number. I know you're upset, but we need to figure this out. My lawyer says I'm entitled to half the house. I didn't answer. 2 days later, another text, Logan, being childish won't help. I know you're going through stuff, but I have rights too. Going through stuff. That's how she phrased it. Like cancer was just a bad week or a breakup she could distance herself from. I blocked the number. I want to hear your thoughts. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have answered? Would you have confronted her? Let me know in the comments. I know I'm not the only one who's been left to pick up the pieces alone. My second chemo session hit harder than the first. The nausea was constant. I dropped another 10 pounds. I could barely keep water down. Ellie finally came up from Portland and stayed for a week. She cooked, cleaned, and drove me to appointments. Her presence was like fresh air after being underwater for too long. She didn't try to fix anything, she just showed up. Sometimes that's all we need. While she was there, another letter came from Vanessa's lawyer. This one more aggressive, more threats about what I supposedly owed her. Ellie flipped through the pages, her jaw tightening. After what she did, she's lucky you haven't taken her to court for stealing. I didn't answer right away. I was too tired to be angry. We'll get there, I said quietly. Then came a letter from the bank, certified again. Vanessa had attempted to remove my name from our joint credit cards. She'd also tried to access our safe deposit box, the one with the house deed, the Mustang title, and my grandfather's will. But the bank denied her access. She didn't have the second key. My key. I called Brian immediately. She's getting desperate, he said. She knows there are still loose ends. What do I do now? I asked. Close that box. Open a new one in your name only. And it's time to file that title change for the Mustang. Lock it down. The next day I took a sick day from the garage. Not that I'd worked much lately. Every day felt like a sick day now. I went to the bank, closed the safe deposit box, and opened a new one. Then I drove straight to the DMV and filed the title paperwork, officially removing Vanessa's name from the Mustang. I'd never filed it, originally another close call. That night, just hours after I submitted the paperwork, another message arrived. Different number, same tone. You changed the Mustang title. That car is half mine. You put my name on it. I froze. How could she know already I'd filed the change that morning? Then it hit me someone was feeding her information. Someone at the DMV or the bank. Or worse, someone in my own circle. I want to ask you all, what would you do if you realized your ex was still tracking your every move? Would you change your whole strategy? Would you confront the person helping her? Drop your thoughts below. I've never needed outside wisdom more than I did at that moment. I called Brian right away. I think she has help. Someone's telling her what I'm doing. There was a pause on the line. Her father has connections. Wouldn't put it past him. So what's next? I asked. We feed them the wrong story, he said calmly. Let's set a trap. And just like that, everything shifted again. I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I was laying the groundwork for something bigger, something she wouldn't see coming. And while she thought I was broken and too tired to fight, she had no idea the man she left behind wasn't the same one she walked away from. What happened next started with a phone call to a realtor and a bait line she couldn't resist. The next morning I called the realtor who had been handling the sale of the land my grandfather left me. Her name was Diane, a sharp woman with a reputation for being discreet. I asked her to put the sale on pause. No explanation, just a firm request to delay any movement. Then I casually mentioned I was exploring other options for liquidating assets and dropped a few phrases that I knew would spark curiosity if anyone was listening. Medical bills piling up, might need to cash out early, looking at my 401k. I made sure to say it clearly, loud enough over the phone for it to matter. The line went quiet for a moment before Diane said, "Of course. Let me know when you're ready to resume." Then I called my investment firm, asked about early withdrawal penalties on my small 401k. I made it sound urgent, desperate even. I wanted someone listening on the other end, if they were indeed feeding information to Vanessa, to think I was strapped for cash, backed into a corner. Brian called this the soft bait. Something realistic, believable. Something a lawyer or a family insider might latch onto and run with. 2 days later it worked. Vanessa's lawyer sent a brand new letter. This one was aggressive and oddly specific. It included a list of demands, a portion of any proceeds from the sale of inherited property, and a fair division of all retirement accounts. Brian and I sat at his kitchen table, reading it side by side. He smiled for the first time in weeks. "She took the bait," he said. "Now we show our cards." It's strange how quiet victories feel when they're wrapped in legal documents. There's no cheering, no clapping, just signatures, timestamps, and the slow, steady satisfaction of watching a plan unfold. But the emotional weight of what was happening hadn't lessened. If anything, it was growing heavier. Each day, I was physically weaker from the chemo, yet more focused. Vanessa had tried to gut me emotionally, financially, and legally, but every move she made gave me more evidence. If you've ever been betrayed, then had to act like everything was normal while secretly building your way back, then you know the silence is the loudest part. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to outsmart someone who thought they had you beat? Share your story in the comments. I know someone else out there needs to know they're not alone. I spent the next few weeks focused on recovery. My body was losing weight faster than I could control. My appetite was gone, but the doctors kept using words like stable, responding, and encouraging. Ellie visited every other weekend. She'd help with groceries, cook clean, and just sit with me. We didn't always talk about Vanessa or the case. Sometimes we just watched TV or drank tea on the porch in silence. That kind of companionship, wordless and steady, was medicine in its own right. Meanwhile, Tim and Lisa from next door never stopped checking in. Casseroles, a mowed lawn, a box of fresh produce left on my porch without a note. Small acts, but every one of them a reminder that not all people leave when it gets hard. Some show up without needing to be asked. My job at Wilson's Auto had reduced my hours, but they kept my insurance going. My boss, Jerry, stopped by one afternoon just to see how I was holding up. I didn't tell him everything, but he didn't ask for details either. "Garage is still yours when you're ready," he said before leaving. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. Then on a quiet Tuesday morning, Brian called with news. "We got the documentation from her bank," he said. I could hear it in his voice. Something had broken loose. "Want to guess what she did with the money I didn't answer?" "She wrote a check for $30,000 to her parents, the same day she cleaned out your joint account." I closed my eyes, letting it settle. "Why would she do that? Because she's trying to hide it," he said. "Move it around, make it harder to trace or recover." "Can she even do that?" I asked. "Not legally, and certainly not during a documented medical crisis involving a spouse. Any judge is going to see this as an attempt to conceal marital assets." He paused, then added, "We're almost there. Just a little more." But that's when it hit me. Not just the weight of what she'd done, but the thought that her parents were involved. I had memories of sitting at their table during holidays being polite while they questioned my job, my future, my worth. Now I saw those dinners for what they really were, interviews I was never meant to pass. The truth was ugly, but it brought clarity. This wasn't just Vanessa. This was a system around her that had quietly rooted against me from the beginning. She hadn't just walked out of our marriage. She walked into the arms of people who saw me as disposable, and now they were going to learn that I wasn't the man they assumed I was. I stood on my porch that night, a blanket around my shoulders, watching the stars flicker over the trees. I felt tired, but not broken. I was still here, still standing. And the next time they tried to pull something, they'd find out exactly what I'd become. What happened next started with a silver BMW and a face I hadn't seen in months, but would never forget. It was late afternoon when I left my third chemotherapy session, weaker than ever. My legs trembled under my own weight, and every breath felt like it took effort. I was just trying to make it to the car when I saw it parked across from the hospital entrance. A silver BMW, polished pristine. Too polished for a parking lot like this. Then I saw the man behind the wheel, Vanessa's father, still dressed like a courtroom hadn't left his soul decades ago, face frozen behind that perfect lawyer's mask. At first I thought maybe it was coincidence, but the moment our eyes met I knew better. He wasn't there for anyone else. He was watching for me. I walked straight to his window, tapped once. The glass rolled down slowly like I was beneath him even now. "Logan," he said, looking me over like I was a business problem that got more expensive the longer you ignored it. "You look unwell." I didn't answer that. "Why are you here?" I asked instead. He didn't blink. "Vanessa is concerned. She says you're being unreasonable about the divorce proceedings." I nearly laughed. Unreasonable. After what she did, she drained our savings, fled the same day I got my diagnosis, and then demanded more. "Is that what she calls it?" I asked. "Unreasonable. She's prepared to be generous," he continued. "Given your situation." I leaned in slightly. She already took everything. What more could I possibly want? He shifted in his seat. For the first time, his composure cracked. "Logan, be practical. You're sick. You need to focus on getting better, not fighting a legal battle you can't afford. And that's when it hit me. That's what this was about. They thought I was weak. That cancer had left me desperate. That I'd roll over to avoid stress. They didn't know I'd already locked down the Mustang, documented everything, and uncovered the check to her parents. They had no clue I'd set the trap, and they'd already walked into it. If you've ever had someone underestimate, you assume your silence means surrender. Drop a comment below, because I think more people need to hear what happens when quiet men finally speak up. I looked at him and smiled just a little. Tell Vanessa I'll have my response to her lawyer by Friday. I turned to walk away. Logan, he called after me, don't make this harder than it needs to be. But I didn't look back. On Thursday morning, I met Brian and the real estate attorney he brought in, Catherine Chen. She was calm, no nonsense, and completely unimpressed by the games Vanessa and her father had been playing. We laid everything out: timeline, medical records, Vanessa's text, the financial documents, Megan's message confirming Vanessa had known about my diagnosis, and of course the $30,000 check to her parents. This is textbook financial abandonment, Catherine said as she flipped through the files, and attempted concealment of marital assets. No judge will look kindly on this. I sat quietly watching her work, letting the tension slowly unwind in my chest. I hadn't realized how heavy it had all been until someone else carried a piece of it. "So what's our move?" I asked. Catherine didn't miss a beat. "We file our own divorce action. We're not just responding, we're going on the offensive. We request full recovery of the missing funds, plus legal fees and a clean break from any future claims. And will that work?" I asked. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "This is the cleanest case of spousal abandonment I've seen in 15 years. But I doubt it'll go to court. They'll settle. Fast. There's a particular relief in knowing someone else sees the truth for what it is." I wasn't crazy. I wasn't petty. I was defending myself. And for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of that. The next morning, Catherine sent the complete divorce filing to Vanessa's lawyer, bank records, text messages, statements from Megan, and my full medical documentation. By noon, Vanessa's attorney was asking for an emergency meeting. If you've ever been gaslit into believing justice was too far out of reach, let this be a reminder: documentation is power. And if you fought back against someone who thought you were too sick, too broken, or too tired to fight, I'd love to hear how you turned the tables. The meeting was scheduled for Monday. I spent the weekend resting, mentally preparing. I wasn't nervous, I was just done being manipulated. I had no plans to speak much during that meeting, unless I had to. But I was going to show up, look them in the eye, and remind them I hadn't gone anywhere. They didn't get to bury me just because I was sick. Sunday night, a message came through from another unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. "This is cruel, Logan. I made a mistake, but this is vindictive. My parents can't return the money right now. You're trying to destroy me." I stared at the screen, jaw clenched. Destroy her. She walked out. She stole from me. She left me to fight cancer alone. I wasn't the one hiding behind lawyers and rich parents. For the first time since this began, I replied, "Actions have consequences." Then I blocked the number, placed the phone face down, and sat back in my chair. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. And the man I used to be, the man who apologized just to keep the peace, he wasn't showing up Monday. The man walking into that office had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The moment of reckoning was closer than they realized, and I was more ready than they would ever be. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of day where everything feels heavier. I hadn't slept much the night before. It wasn't anxiety, it was clarity. Every move I'd made over the last few weeks had been building to this moment. I'd documented everything, secured what mattered, and handed the rest over to two people I trusted, Brian and Catherine. I wasn't walking into that law office as the man who'd been left behind. I was walking in as the man who had survived the worst days of his life and still stood tall. When I arrived, Catherine and Brian were already there. Catherine handed me a coffee and looked over her glasses. "Say nothing unless I tell you. We've got this." I nodded. Didn't need more than that. At 10 a.m., sharp, Vanessa arrived with her lawyer and her father. She looked tan, relaxed, not a trace of the chaos she'd created in her wake. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes avoiding mine. Her father gave me a passing glance like I was a problem he'd expected to be solved weeks ago. Her lawyer, a thin man in his 50s with expensive frames and a permanent frown, got straight to it. "We've reviewed your filing," he began. "While we don't agree with your characterization of the events, my client is open to negotiating a settlement to avoid unnecessary conflict." Catherine didn't flinch. "This isn't a negotiation," she said calmly. "This is a courtesy meeting before we proceed to court. Your client abandoned her husband during a medical crisis, emptied their joint savings, attempted to conceal those funds through her parents, and continued to make demands, even after being notified of his condition. We have the records, the messages, the witness testimony, and a full medical timeline. If you'd like to see the court documents, we're prepared to file. I brought copies." The silence that followed was sharp. Vanessa's lawyer opened the folder Catherine slid across the table and began flipping through it. Her father leaned forward. "Surely we can come to a reasonable. Your daughter wrote a $30,000 check to you," Catherine called in. "From a joint marital account during an active medical crisis. Will that money be returned today, or should we include you in the filing as a recipient of fraudulently transferred marital funds?" That was the moment everything shifted. Vanessa's lawyer cleared his throat. Her father sat back. Vanessa finally looked at me just for a second. Her face was pale now. The tan seemed to fade. She knew it was over. Her lawyer spoke again, this time slower. "What exactly are your terms?" Catherine didn't blink. "Full return of the $38,000. Vanessa forfeits all claim to the house, the Mustang, the inherited land, and Logan's retirement accounts. She assumes responsibility for all legal fees incurred to date. In return, we won't pursue criminal charges for financial abandonment or fraud." Her lawyer opened his mouth, closed it again. Vanessa's father leaned in, whispered something into his ear. Then they asked for 48 hours to consider. As we left the conference room, Vanessa tried to meet my eye again. I walked past her without a glance. In the elevator, Brian clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did good," he said. "I didn't do anything," I replied. "Just showed up." "Sometimes that's the hardest part," he said. It didn't feel like a win, not yet. But it felt like the tide had turned. I'd spent so long bracing for loss that I hadn't considered what it might feel like to regain control. 2 days later, Catherine called. "They've accepted the terms," she said. "The check will arrive within 30 days. All claims will be dropped. We'll finalize the divorce next week." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat at the kitchen table alone again and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for months. That evening, I drove to the garage and just sat inside the Mustang. The interior still smelled like oil and leather, the dashboard warm from the afternoon sun. It was mine again, fully and legally. Vanessa's name had never touched the title. One more thing she hadn't been able to take from me. And sitting there, hands on the wheel, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The money arrived exactly 30 days later. A cashier's check, clean and final. I walked it into the oncology center myself. Paid off my treatment balance in full. Julia, the nurse who'd sat with me through my first infusion, was at the front desk. "You're looking better," she said. "Numbers came back good last week. Feel better too?" I told her, sliding the check across the counter. "Insurance came through?" she asked. I nodded. "Something like that." On the way out, I stopped on the sidewalk and looked back at the building. I wasn't done yet, but I was getting close. I had survived something that nearly broke me, and I had done it with no help from the one person who'd promised she'd never leave. I knew now that her leaving wasn't my failure. It was her truth finally showing. And just as I was settling into that clarity, I got a message from Megan Vanessa's cousin. It was simple. They're selling their lake house to cover the money. My aunt is furious. She's blaming you. But I wanted you to know some of us understand what really happened. I hope you're doing better. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The past had closed its doors. What lay ahead now wasn't about her or them. It was about rebuilding, quietly, stronger than before. And while I didn't know what would come next, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't the same man she left behind. I was becoming something else entirely. The divorce was finalized a week later. I signed the papers at Catherine's office with Brian sitting across from me. There was no champagne, no sense of triumph. Just a pen, 3 signatures, and the hollow sound of closure. Vanessa had relinquished all claims on the house, the car, the land, the money. She was legally gone from every corner of my life. But her absence had already made itself comfortable long before the paperwork caught up. When it was done, Catherine asked if I needed copies mailed or emailed. "Mail," I said. I didn't want her name showing up in my inbox anymore. As Brian and I walked to the parking lot, he turned to me and asked, "What now?" I didn't even pause. "Finish treatment, get better, figure out what's next." He nodded. "The land sale should close next month. That's another $65,000 in your pocket. And if you decide to sell the Mustang—" "Not yet," I said quickly. "I'm not ready to let go of everything." That night I sat on my back deck with a glass of water and a blanket. The air was cool. The nausea had finally subsided. My hair was slowly growing back in patches. The word remission had been whispered during my last appointment. Not confirmed, but not dismissed either. That was enough for now. I looked out over the lawn I'd once shared with someone who saw love as temporarily conditional, and I thought about how much of life is spent trying to hold things together when they've already started falling apart. But something was different now. The silence no longer stung. It felt earned. Then came the text. It was from an unknown number. At this point, I'd learned to expect them. I opened it anyway. "I heard you're in remission. I'm glad. I know you won't believe this, but I think about you often. I made a terrible mistake. I was scared and selfish. I'm sorry, Logan, for everything. Vanessa." There was no venom in my reaction, just a deep, almost clinical detachment. The words didn't sting. They didn't make me angry. They barely registered. She hadn't said "I miss you" or "I regret leaving." She said "I think about you," as if I were a concept, a memory she occasionally flipped through like an old photo album. I read the message twice, then typed out 4 words: "I survived. Be well." Then I blocked the number for the last time. If you've ever gotten an apology that came too late to matter, I want to know, did it bring you peace or reopen wounds? Drop your story below. Maybe someone else needs your voice to process their own silence. After that, I threw myself into rebuilding, not just physically, but in every way that counted. I started walking each morning. I began organizing the garage again. I cleaned out old boxes that had been collecting dust since before we were married. I found photos I'd forgotten existed, memories of a life I lived before I tried to become someone else's version of enough. Ellie visited often. We didn't talk much about Vanessa anymore. There was nothing left to say. Instead, we planned. She helped me list the house. The equity was strong, the market was moving fast, and Spokane no longer felt like home. We talked about where I'd go, what I'd do, and for the first time those conversations didn't feel like escape. They felt like arrival. I called Joel, a buddy of mine from back in tech school. He ran a custom auto shop just outside Missoula. For years he'd been telling me there was a spot open for someone like me, someone who loved old engines and wasn't afraid of grease under his nails. "Still got space for me?" I asked. "Hell yes," he said. "When can you start?" That phone call changed everything. Within a month I'd closed on the house, sold it for more than I expected, bought a small cabin outside Missoula, 2 bedrooms, a big garage, and a view of the mountains. The Mustang came with me, of course. It deserved a second life, too. Tim and Lisa came by the morning I left Spokane. Lisa handed me a casserole in a glass dish, wrapped in a dish towel. "Heat it up tonight," she said. "You shouldn't start a new life hungry." Tim shook my hand, pulled me in for a quick hug. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Really okay." I paused, getting there. I made the 6-hour drive with the windows cracked and the radio low. Somewhere outside Coeur d'Alene, I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs since the day she left. Montana rolled out in front of me like a quiet promise. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I'd face it alone on my own terms, and not alone in a bad way. Alone in a clear, decisive, freeing kind of way. The first few weeks in Missoula were slow and peaceful. Joel got me into the shop quickly. Working with my hands again reminded me who I really was. Not just a man who'd been left, not just a patient, but someone who created, who restored, who rebuilt. One afternoon, while adjusting the carburetor on a '72 Chevelle, I realized I hadn't thought about Vanessa all day, not even once, and that more than any legal win or financial recovery felt like the real turning point. What happened next wasn't dramatic. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet. A shift in light. A return to something I hadn't felt in years, ownership of my own peace. 3 months into my new life in Montana, the days began to settle into something that felt like rhythm. Mornings were crisp, sometimes even icy, and the air had that sharp smell of pine and motor oil. I'd wake up, early drink coffee on the porch with the mountains watching in silence, then drive 10 minutes into town to Joel's shop. I was working part-time, easing back into the swing, while still checking in with my doctor every few weeks. My numbers were good, better than expected. I'd gained a few pounds back. Hair was growing in soft, uneven tufts. Joel joked that I looked like I'd been through war and came out the other side, half Wolverine, half veteran. He wasn't far off. One afternoon I was in the garage at the cabin, finally turning my attention back to the Mustang. I hadn't touched it much since the move. It sat quietly under a tarp, like it had been waiting for me to heal before I came back to it. I pulled the cover off and ran my hand over the hood. The paint still gleamed, but the edges needed work. It had survived the storm with me, and now it deserved to be restored for no one but me. That was when the text came in, a different number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity still had a small voice in me. It read, "I saw you moved. The cabin looks nice. I'm glad you're doing better." No name, but I didn't need one. Only one person would say something like that and try to sound like a friend instead of a ghost. I stared at the screen for a few seconds. She must have seen something online. Maybe Megan mentioned it. Maybe someone passed along a photo. But what struck me wasn't the message. It was how little I felt reading it. No anger, no grief. Just a recognition that she still thought she had a place in my life, even if only as a quiet observer. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Have you ever had someone try to circle back into your life after walking away at your worst? What did you do? Did you let them in? Or did you close the door for good? Share your story. I'm willing to bet it'll speak to someone who's still deciding. After that moment, something shifted. I spent the rest of the day under the hood hands, dirty sleeves rolled. That night I ordered new parts, not to prep it for sale, but to restore it. Not for profit, not for nostalgia, but because it was mine. Like me, it had been stripped down, abandoned, misunderstood, but it had good bones, and I was ready to bring it back on my own terms. The following week, Joel invited me to a small BBQ at his place. Nothing fancy, just a few shop guys, some neighbors' beers around a fire pit. I hadn't said yes to much socializing since Spokane, but this time I did. That night something strange happened. I laughed, real laughter, not the polite kind you give out of habit, but the kind that sneaks up on you and shakes something loose. One of the guys, Nick, started telling this ridiculous story about setting his wife's kitchen towel on fire trying to flambe dessert. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my beer. For a moment I wasn't the man who got abandoned. I wasn't the cancer patient. I wasn't the guy rebuilding his life. I was just part of a group, present, light. It reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. And there it was, the highlight. Not a courtroom win or a financial recovery, just the return of something human and necessary. Connection. If you've had a moment like that where the pain faded long enough for joy to sneak back in, tell me about it. Those moments matter. They're the proof that healing is real even when it doesn't make headlines. The next morning I got up early and drove to the lake. I didn't fish, didn't hike, just stood at the edge of the dock, hands in my jacket pockets, breathing in the stillness. Montana wasn't loud like the city. It didn't demand anything. It just existed. And for the first time in over a year, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to the world. Later that day, I got a letter from Catherine. No drama, just a final update. The money was cleared. Vanessa's family had sold the lake house to pay off the debt. The legal chapter was officially closed. I folded the letter, slid it into a drawer, and didn't look back. Peace. It turns out doesn't come in declarations. It doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in during the quiet, in the tightening of a bolt, in the crackle of a fire pit, in the steady hand holding a wrench that once trembled from chemo. I walked back into the garage, pulled the new carburetor out of the box, and started installing it. There was work to be done, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like the kind of work that was leading somewhere worth going. The first snow hit Missoula earlier than usual. By mid-November, the trees outside my cabin were dressed in white, and the air carried the clean silence only winter can bring. I'd just finished bolting the new carburetor into the Mustang, the engine humming smoother than it had in years. There was a strange satisfaction in watching something come back to life under your hands, especially when so much of your own life had been ripped apart and rebuilt from the ground up. The car was no longer a project I'd started for someone else. It was mine now in every sense, and with each part that I restored, I felt a little more whole. That morning I drove the Mustang into town for the first time since moving. The engine purred. The tires gripped the icy roads like it knew the way. I parked it outside the shop and Joel walked out with a grin. "She's back," he said, running his hand along the hood. "Looks like she's got fight in her again." "She always did," I said. "She just needed to be seen for it." He nodded without needing to ask more. Work had become more than a distraction. It was therapy with grease under your fingernails. We had a '68 Camaro in the shop that had been sitting in someone's barn for 2 decades, and getting it back into running shape was a full-time job. I loved the rhythm, problem, solution, repeat. Machines didn't lie. They broke, sure, but they didn't betray you. One night after closing the garage, I got a message from Ellie. She'd been waiting for a scan result from a routine checkup. She'd had her own cancer scare a few years ago, and though it turned out benign, Every follow-up brought a fresh wave of worry. Clear the message read, just one word, but it felt like a door swinging wide open. I called her immediately. We didn't say much, just breathed on the line for a few moments like two people who'd been given permission to exhale. Sometimes peace isn't loud. It just shows up quietly and asks you to notice it. That weekend, I went back out to the lake. I stood on the same dock where I'd gone months earlier, only now the water was starting to freeze along the edges. The wind was sharp, but the cold didn't bother me. I had my hands deep in my coat pockets, boots crunching on snow, and for the first time since everything happened, I realized I didn't carry the weight of Vanessa anymore. Not in my chest, not in my thoughts. She was gone, and I'd survived it. Have you ever had a moment like that, when the thing you thought would haunt you forever suddenly doesn't? Let me know in the comments. Maybe your moment was a place or a song or a smell that stopped hurting. Those moments matter more than people think. That night, I made a pot of chili and sat by the fireplace with an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. Not of Vanessa. This one went further back, childhood, high school, early days at the garage. I came across a photo of me and my dad leaning over the hood of our first project car. I was maybe 13 hands too small for the wrench I was gripping. My dad had a smudge of oil on his cheek, and we were both smiling like we'd just built a rocket. I remembered how he always told me, "Son, there's no fixing something that doesn't want to be fixed. Know when to walk and know when to rebuild." At the time I thought he was just talking about cars, but sitting there years later I knew he'd meant more than that. I placed the album back on the shelf and pulled out a notebook. It wasn't something I did often, but that night I wrote down everything I'd learned since the diagnosis. It wasn't about keeping score. It was about memory, a reminder that I'd walked through hell, but I hadn't stayed there. A few pages in, I wrote one line and circled it twice. Not all storms come to destroy, some come to clear the path. The next morning I went into the shop early. Joel was already there, sipping coffee and working on a truck bed heater coil. "You're here early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," I answered. Felt like getting my hands dirty. "Well, the Dodgin' Bay 3's been giving us hell. Want to take a crack at it?" I smiled. "Absolutely." The truck had a faulty fuel pressure regulator and a throttle that stuck on cold starts. It took hours, a few burned knuckles, and 3 cups of black coffee, but by noon, it started clean. Joel patted me on the back. "You ever think you'd get back to this?" I thought about it for a second. "No," I said, "but I'm glad I did." Later that day, as I closed up the shop, I stood in the doorway and watched the snow fall slow and steady. There were no more letters, no more demands, no more apologies, just the sound of life moving forward. And buried deep in the calm of that evening was a quiet certainty I had rebuilt something no one could take from me. I pulled out my phone and looked at the home screen. No missed calls, no unread messages, just a reminder to refill my next prescription. A small, ordinary thing, but after the chaos of the past year, ordinary felt like a gift. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped out into the cold with steady steps and a steady heart. The new year rolled in quietly. No fireworks, no celebration, just the sound of wind brushing through the trees behind the cabin and the soft hum of the baseboard heaters kicking on in the middle of the night. I spent New Year's Eve in the garage with the Mustang, a cold beer in one hand and a socket wrench in the other. I wasn't thinking about resolutions. I was thinking about how far I'd come without ever planning to get here. By mid-January, my oncologist called with the news I had dared to hope for. "Complete remission," she said, her voice warm but careful. "We'll continue monitoring every 6 months, but as of now, the cancer is gone." I let the silence hang for a moment before answering. "Thank you." Those 2 words were all I could manage, but they were packed with a year's worth of fear fight and quiet hope. That evening I called Ellie. She screamed with relief before launching into a string of celebratory plans, road trips, hiking, maybe even a tattoo. We laughed about it for a while, and for the first time in a long time, that laugh came from deep in my chest, not the surface. I hadn't just survived. I had outlasted everything meant to break me. The next call I made was to Joel. "Still got that space in the shop for full time?" I asked. "You know it," he said, without missing a beat. "Come Monday, it's yours." I walked out onto the porch, the snow packed underfoot, and looked out at the mountains. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. They were just there like they'd always been, like I now was. On Monday, I stepped into the shop with a full shift ahead, and no distractions waiting in the shadows. No court filings, no legal fees, no betrayal. Just tools, machines, and honest work. The team welcomed me like I'd never been part-time. Nick tossed me a set of keys for the new supply shed and said, "Looks like you're staying a while." "That's the plan," I told him. That afternoon we pulled in a '71 Firebird with a busted transmission and rust around the wheel wells. It was a beautiful wreck. I ran my hand along the driver's door and smiled. Let's bring her back. That car wasn't much different from me. Some things fall apart, but with the right hands, they're worth restoring. Later that week, I got a card in the mail. No return address, just my name in familiar handwriting. For a second, I thought it might be Vanessa again reaching for something long gone. But inside was a short note from Megan. "I saw your update. I'm happy for you. I hope you know how many people are rooting for you, even the quiet ones." It was signed simply, "Take care." I folded the card, placed it in the drawer next to my dad's old wrench, and left it there. I didn't need to reply. Some connections are meant to fade gently. That weekend, Joel and I took the Mustang out for a drive. Just an hour of empty roads and low sun. The engine growled like it had never been sick a day in its life. "You kept it together," Joel said at one point. "Most people would have lost everything." I nodded. I did lose everything, just not the stuff that mattered. If you've ever hit rock bottom and rebuilt from the ashes, I want to hear about it. What kept you going? What reminded you that you were still here, still standing? Drop it in the comments. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs right now. That night after the drive, I parked the Mustang in the garage and stood there for a long while with the lights off. It wasn't just a car. It was a reminder that even when people walk out, when money disappears, when health fades, if you fight for yourself, you can come back stronger. Not the same, but better. More intentional, more grounded. The wind picked up outside, rattling the pine trees, and I closed the garage door slowly. Inside the house, the fire was still going. I sat down on the couch, pulled a blanket over my lap, and leaned back into the cushions. There were no more texts to dread, no emails to brace for. Just quiet, just warmth. I glanced toward the hallway where the bedroom light still glowed softly. Tomorrow the land sale would finalize. Another door closed, another beginning made possible. I didn't know where life would go from here. But for the first time in a long time, I trusted myself to walk into whatever came next, with open eyes and steady hands. Spring came slowly in Montana, like the land itself was learning to breathe again. The snow melted off the cabin roof. The creek behind the property started running again, and wildflowers pushed through cracks in the frozen soil like small, stubborn miracles. I'd wake up each morning to birdsong and light pouring through the windows, and sometimes, just for a moment, I'd forget the pain that had come before. Not because I'd erased it, but because I'd learned to live alongside it. I wasn't the same man who sat on that deck in Spokane with a beer and a broken heart. I wasn't the man hoping for someone to come home. I'd become someone else entirely, quieter, stronger, clearer. Cancer taught me how fragile life can be. Betrayal taught me who I was when everything comfortable was stripped away. And healing taught me that rebuilding isn't about going back to who you were, but choosing who you want to be from here on out. There are still hard days. I still get tired. Some scars don't fade. But now when I look in the mirror, I see a man I respect. A man who didn't fold when it got dark. I kept showing up, even when no one else did. And I think that matters. If this story has meant something to you, if it's made you feel seen or less alone or more hopeful, I hope you'll leave a comment below. Tell me what part of it spoke to you. Because stories like this, they aren't just mine. They belong to anyone who's ever had to start over. And if you haven't yet, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Not just to follow a story, but to be part of a space where honesty, healing, and resilience matter. We don't sugarcoat the hard stuff here, but we don't let it define us either. We rebuild, we learn, we keep going, and sometimes we even thrive.